Welcome to Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, another episode. Hope all of you had a great Memorial Day weekend. We are back this week with a brand new Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. And Bubba, today we're going to interview Chris Burgard. Chris has quite the background, and I know that, you know, when your handlers hand out bios, Chris probably wishes we would move on to his life as a director. And all the success.
Yeah, he's actually accomplished a lot of really cool things in his life.
Stuff. Yeah. So. But Chris, first of all, welcome to Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Thank you for your time today, brother.
Thank you, sir. And if you could please read the shortest bio that's out there, that would be the best.
I'm sorry, we're going to 1986. We have to.
Oh, Lord.
Your Hollywood debut is Matthew Broderick's Dance Double.
In Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You know, what a classic movie that has stood through time. I mean, to this day, if it's on and I'm tuning by, I stop and watch it. So tell us a little bit about being on that, because we've got to get past that before we can do the rest of the stuff, Chris. We just can't.
It's the way we are, Chris, and we are going to sing Shake It Up, Baby, and we want to see you move.
Shake It Up, Baby.
Well, I got to tell you that job was it was amazing, because I got to that's what took me from Chicago. I used to be a ballet dancer. I'm a former bull rider and ballet dancer, and I was on scholarship at Ruth Page Chicago Ballet at the time, and got hired by Kenny Ortega to be one of Matthew's dance doubles. He had a bad knee, and he didn't want to do the whole parade scene with Dunkashane. But when he got guys that could double for him, his knee got better. But I got to work on that film for 3 weeks, and it was outstanding because I got to watch John Hughes, the director.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from watching him. And I went on to work with Kenny Ortega on more projects. He became a big Hollywood A-list director. And that really ground into my brain, because at the time I just wanted to go act. I didn't think I'd ever end up being a director and be making my own projects. But because of that, and watching what a good director like John Hughes does, that takes a concept from thought to script to the picture and the release, it was just a blessing that I was able to do that. And it just, I've had that in my life. God has put me in just interesting places that have just really trained me to be where we are now. And I'm just blessed to do that. I mean, to go from Ferris Bueller's Day Off to being in the middle of attempted coups in Central America, and then on J6, it's been just cool.
All right, Chris, so I've got to know, shooting the scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, was this as much fun as it looked like in the movie?
More. it was just more fun. They closed off all of downtown and Daly Plaza. It was so fun. I couldn't, and that's what got me into the whole business, because I was like, I can't believe the job is this fun and they're actually paying me to do this. Like, I'd be crazy not to do that. And you know, Kenny said, hey, you can stay in Chicago and you keep working, or you can move to Hollywood and make a career. And that's what I did. And it was that's what started the ride.
Well, and we tell young people all the time, you know, I have kids that are in the entertainment business, and we tell them when they come through here, whenever a door opens, no matter how small an opportunity you may think it is, you take that first step. If a door opens, walk through it, and then you'll start networking. You'll show people your work ethic. Then you can show them your talent. Then you get to meet this person who then knows that person, and that was your door in, and you took it. But I want to ask you, because you went on to do things, you know, television shows and all this. Where was the turn for you as you know, an actor and then director, where you said, I want to use these gifts to make a difference because I don't like the direction of my country? How did that process happen? Because we're going to get to the war on truth, but you've done more, including one, like you said, that kind of caused you some you're considered a national threat. When did you, where was the turn when you said, you know what, I know why I have these gifts, but I want to do this with it?
Well, I wish it was that clear. It's more like I stumbled into it.
Okay.
And that would have been 2000. That would have been 2005. You know, I was blessed in Hollywood. I went to Hollywood, did music videos, did TV series, did movies, got to direct my own horror movie. And then in 2005, I just gotten married, and my wife's like, okay, what are you going to do with your career? You're 40 years old. You're riding bulls. Your body's not going to last forever. You know, what are you going to do? And I'd made this rock and roll horror movie, ended up finishing that, went to the Cannes Film Festival market, and I was planning on writing scripts and making more features, but there was stuff going on the border in 2005, and there's this whole Minuteman movement that was going on. And I was working with two fellas on some fences that had come up illegally from Mexico. And what they had told me was that when the cartel came in and took over their village, you either worked for the cartel or you didn't work at all. And they were telling me how it wasn't safe for their daughters to let their daughters be around the village, because if they got raped, there was nothing you could do. And that when they came across the border, that you're told you to carry these drugs, they put a gun against your head or we'll shoot you and leave you in the desert. Well, that was 180% diametrically opposed to what was on the corporate media at that time. So I figured I'd go down and find out for myself what was going on. So I literally went down to the border with cameras and an RV and books on how to make a documentary, because I'd never made a documentary before. And I ended up being embedded with the Minutemen for a month, and I spent, on and off on the border for the next 20 years working with law enforcement after making that movie. I made this movie called Border. It screened for both houses of Congress in 2007, but it got me blacklisted in Hollywood. And that's what opened my eyes to how everything works, because we made this movie about border, which was just what was happening on the border. And when we tested it on the left and the right, people were like, wow, this shouldn't be happening. Women, they should not have rape trees on the border. The cartels should not be allowed to do this to people. This is insane. But when the movie came out, my wife and I got attacked and demonized as being nativist and xenophobes. I had to look that one up. I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah, they got a lot of adjectives.
Yeah.
And people I knew in Hollywood for 20 years wouldn't return my phone calls anymore. And I didn't work in Hollywood for 3 years. I actually, and by being not working in Hollywood, I ran into some interesting people. I had been working with a task force out of DOD against the Muslim Brotherhood. And when we were coming across jihadis coming across the border in West Texas, the guys out of DOD introduced me to Andrew Breitbart, and he and I became very good friends. And I was one of the first contributors with him, and worked with him for many years. And my whole course just changed from doing Hollywood stuff to making movies that just seemed to tell the truth. And I just kept finding myself in these interesting places, from the border to Honduras to J6. Just a blessed life.
And Chris, can I ask you something about the cartel? Because people have asked me this, and I really don't know what to tell them. You've been there, you've seen it. We attribute a lot of negative things to the cartels, and certainly they are organized crime and do a lot of bad things. But are there also freelancers out there that will they're just bad people in a community and claim they're part of the cartel to kind of, coattail in on their terror to try to have their own little dictatorship?
No, I don't think they last very long. The plazas that coming into America, these are fought over vehemently. That's where most of the violence is. When you hear violence in Mexico and conflict just on the other side of the border, they're fighting over these plazas. They're fighting. At least they were till the Biden administration. Now there's no plot. Now everything's a plaza. But no, they defended that. They defend their territory, and it's guys that are independent guys, coyotes would come up, and we used to have that in the old days. I know this trail, I knew this, and it was a family business. Now the cartels came in and just took that over and took that out. And that's what you see is the fighting between the factions. And one thing I want to say about my 18 years working on and off the border and working with law enforcement is in the old days when we would track the bad guys, like in the deserts and these pastures here in Texas, the really bad guys, the loads they were carrying would be dope. And that was the bad guys. They still bring in a bunch of dope, but now when we catch them, the loads are children. And as a dad, I can't tell you what that's like. I mean, the last load that we ran into was in Eagle Pass, summer before last. And I've sat with women being raped on the border. I picked up too many dead bodies and carried them out here in Texas. And the evil that's going on the border, I mean, we could do a whole show on that. And it's insane how everything that you're hearing about the border is not what's going on the border. The border is people are dying every single day. It's evil. I've made 2 movies about it. Both have screened for Congress. In 2007, the movie Border was used to stop Bush's amnesty immigration bill. When I went back last summer and screened a film I made with Tom Homan, who's Donald Trump's ICE director, I made a movie called Death County and the River of Broken Dreams. In that movie, you see us interrogating soldiers coming across the border, denying that they were soldiers. But then when you point out, dude, I see the way you're standing. I saw how you humped a rock. I saw you go through the razor wire. You're a soldier. Okay, I used to be a combat engineer, but now I just want to be a chef. And we're seeing soldiers coming across the border in numbers I'd never seen in the 18 years previous. When you see small counties in Texas, in Brooks County, Texas, 70 miles north of the border, with so many dead victims from cartel traffic through their county that they have to have a portable morgue in the parking lot at the sheriff's department, and it's full. When you see three-letter operatives explaining how the child trafficking operation that is in full bloom now in the United States under Joe Biden started back in 2016, when he went there on a campaign basically saying, give us your kids. And we lay out and show La Prensa, where he's on the cover of the paper saying, we'll give refugios to menores, we'll give refuge to your children. That started a whole movement heading to the border, that now the result is on the Biden administration, you have 365,000 unaccompanied children in the United States of America, on top of which they've lost another 86,000. And those are significant numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And you look at those 86,000, why have they lost these kids? Well, under Trump, they had biometric DNA testing. You took a swab. If you came to the Fleet Sea Center and you wanted to pick up that kid, you said, hey, Jose and Maria, those are my children. You had to take a DNA test. And if your DNA didn't match, you didn't get that kid. Well, under Biden, they stopped doing that. So that helps traffickers. Where these 86,000 children are now, only God knows.
We'll come back. We'll continue our conversation with Chris Burgard when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues right after this. So a lot of us are wondering, do I have a choice sometimes on where my money goes? And I don't like getting services from businesses that are part of the very problem or support the problem that we're talking about even on this very podcast. The answer is, when it comes to wireless network and your wireless coverage, you do have a choice. It's now been a decade. Believe it or not, some of you still don't know. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. Trust us on this one. They're it. Now, the good news is you don't have to compromise service. They have access to the 3 major networks, same coverage you've been accustomed to, but your phone money does not fund the left. When you switch to Patriot Mobile, you send the message. You're saying, you know what? I'm not going to put my money. I want to go where, free speech is supported. I want to go where religious freedom is celebrated. I want to go where the sanctity of life is protected. I want my Second Amendment to be, to be safe. I want to recognize the military, the veterans, the first responders as the heroes that they are. And you have a 100% U.S.-based customer service team, so switching is easy. You want to keep your number? Fine. You want to keep your phone? Fine. If you want to upgrade, they can do that for you too. They'll help you. So go to patriotmobile.com. Let them find a plan that works for your life. patriotmobile.com. Use /Rick Bubba. That's patriotmobile.com /Rick Bubba, or call 972-PATRIOT and get free activation. Remember the code Rick Bubba. Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. We are talking to Chris Burgard. He's just directed and released back on the 14th of May the War on Truth movie. We'll talk about that. We've kind of walked chronologically through this. What you said about the border is not surprising. It continues to be shocking, and the suppressing the information about that is horrible. And even though people like you are trying your best to get the word out, boy, it's an uphill climb.
It is. Chris, talk to us a little bit about the cartel too. Why are they so efficient down there? I mean, there's many organizations that are nowhere as efficient as they are. And how has it continued to flourish? Does Mexico just have no stomach to stop it? Are they paid off? They have a military, they have police. Why has it just continued to be allowed to happen?
Well, you're looking at Mexico. Mexico is it's, some would argue that it's a failed narco-terrorist state. There's a guy named Rusty Fleming, who's a good buddy of mine, died in a single car crash 2 years back, but he'd written a book called Plata or Plomo, the colonization of Mexico. This is going back 20 years. And he warned everything that was happening in Mexico was going to happen. And now we're seeing it happen in the United States. When the cartels come to you and they say, hey, you're going to carry these drugs for us and we're going to give you this money, or we're going to shoot you. You get the choice, silver or lead. They are run with ruthless precision. They run whole states in Mexico. They come in, they just take over everything. And don't just think that's happening in Mexico. I mean, these guys have their tentacles in the stuff in the United States. The entire United States is divided up between the cartels, and they run business. When I first started doing this, MS-13 and the Mexican Mafia were at war. Well, the Mexican Mafia came in and they made MS-13. They're just soldiers and a distribution arm. Now you see MS-13 in every major city in the United States of America. And these are violent, dangerous people. The cartels are run like Fortune 500 companies. And when I was down on the border, Border Patrol would be the first ones to tell you that cartels had better equipment than they did. They had better digital encryption. They had drones before we started using drones. Money's not an object for these guys. There are no rules. And I'll tell you how things have changed in the 20 years I've been doing this. You used to read and hear about the cartels killing people, decapitating them, taking them apart, dismembering them in Mexico. There's a small place in West Texas where I worked with the sheriff's department for years. And a couple of years ago, I went in and missed my favorite waitress. I was, where is she? And everything got real quiet. It turned out her boyfriend had been working with the cartels, did something they didn't like, and they had taken them into Mexico and got them both down to Mexico, and they cut them up into pieces. And this is just one small town in Texas. And then while I'm trying to absorb this, they start telling me about another fellow that he said his cousin needed help, and they lured him down into Mexico. And he'd been speaking out against the cartels, and they cut him up into pieces. And they called his family and they said, you can't have a funeral, but if you keep your mouth shut, we'll send you the parts back and you can put them in a hole. As I walked out that restaurant, I ran into a 19-year-old young man that was working on the highway through there, and he just had that 1,000-yard stare. Turned out that was the son of the man that had been killed. This is the kind of violence that's happening to Americans due to the cartels that we just don't hear about.
Well,
but it's
I know those of you that listen to this podcast, you're going to say, Rick and Bubba, y'all ask this question over and over again. But Chris, you have so much expertise in this. You've seen it. You've done these documentaries. Bubba and I really are struggling to understand why the left wants this. Is it any more complicated than votes and power? Don't they too see the danger of this? It seems so elementary that you can't have an open border anywhere, southern border or wherever, because of all the problems you are pointing out. It's known, they know it. Are they just saying the power and the votes are worth the danger? We don't understand the game.
Yeah, what is the end result for the left other than we get enough votes to make Texas purple and take them out of play for national elections?
So I can answer your question, fellas, but because we didn't go through the movie and the other stuff first, I may be jumping ahead too much.
Okay, that's fine.
But what you guys are asking great questions from a civilian perspective. If you look at it from a military perspective, it makes total sense. Boone Cutler and General Mike Flynn have a great book out called The Citizen's Handbook to Fifth Generation Warfare. I worked with some guys out of DOD that the task force had been put together by a guy named Rich Higgins and another guy named General Jerry Boykin, who was a co-founder of Delta Force. And as Jerry had said, this country's been at war for many years through asymmetrical warfare. And what Mike Flynn lays out in this book is called the Fifth Generation War. And it's basically taking a country down from the inside out through 1,000 cuts. Why is the border the first line of defense and so important in national security in the United States of America? Well, just look at what's happening coming across the border. You have this organized mass migration, people coming in that are flooding and overburdening financially our cities across America.
Right.
You have an influx of heroin and fentanyl that have been coming in with the help of the CCP, working with Albanians and working with the cartels to bring that over the border. The result of which is during the Biden administration, we've lost more people, more dead Americans than we have killed in action in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Vietnam put together. This is going after the soft underbelly of America. Then you bring in a pandemic that takes $14 trillion out of the middle class, closes small mom and pop businesses, puts it up to the elite and the deep state, that erodes the country's faith in elections. And then you come in with a vaccine and the vaccine mandate, and you put it on the military. This is what happened in the military. You have your hardest chargers being mustered out of service because they won't take the vaccine or court-martialed.
Right.
You have those that stay in that do take the vaccine, and now you're dealing with tremendous amounts of vaccine-injured servicemen. That I have people I've talked to that have told me, give me numbers, that America's ability to respond military to a threat to the United States of America because of the vaccine alone has been degraded 23 to 37%. That's a brilliant military strategic move on the United States of America without ever firing a shot.
Right. So
when you put all this stuff together and then you add it into January 6th, you'll see in the film that January 6th was absolutely a setup. The commander of the Capitol Police Forces that day, former Capitol Police Lieutenant Tariq Johnson, as he says, on that day, everyone on the ground, the MAGA people, the Capitol Police, they were all set up. And then we show you a little bit how that operation happened, who the players were. But January 6th is actually just a part of this larger war on America that is fifth generation war. I know that's a lot to throw at you guys.
No, I hear you. Yeah, but and you mentioned your January 6th documentary. This got you in a lot of trouble with the government.
Yeah, so like I said, God's put me in interesting places, interesting times. I felt like I really needed to be at January 6th. We went last minute. I took my wife, my daughter. We decided to film it because I knew it was going to be a day in history. My buddy and partner, Nick Searcy, who I've done 2 movies with, you may know him from Justified and other stuff. He's one of the bravest guys out of Hollywood. We were there that day. And after being in Honduras, when they tried to take over, overthrow the government down there, I was seeing stuff happen similar on January 6th. And as we're walking down to the Capitol, and there's almost like there could have been between 1.5 and 2 million people there. The numbers were just amazing, more than I'd ever seen before. I'm seeing there's no police on the walk down there, and there's no TV crews. And I said to my wife, I said, this isn't right. She's like, what do you mean? I said, usually you're stepping over TV crews in these kind of rallies. The fact that they're not here showing all these grandmas and prayer groups and church groups tells me this isn't the images that they want to put out today. And I'm concerned that there's going to be an event at the end of this march. Just then, Nick calls me from the Capitol and he says, I'm watching the Capitol Police move the bike racks and they're allowing people into the Capitol. And I looked back at my wife and I said, honey, because I was feeling like I was back in Honduras, I said, someone's going to die today. And as this all transpired and came out, it's exactly what it was. It was a setup. And so we made a movie about it called Capital Punishment. Everything we told you about January 6th was a lie. It was arguably the most censored American film of 2022. And I thought that was the end of it. People wanted us to make a sequel. I didn't want to make a sequel. I didn't have it in my head what the sequel would be. And while I was making this movie on the border, Death County, the River Broken Dreams of Tom Homan, the FBI came quarter mile to my ranch here in Texas, and I found out I was the subject of a terrorist investigation against the national security of the United States of America because I made a movie. So you're looking at a 62-year-old award-winning filmmaker who's never been arrested, comes from a law enforcement family. My dad was a veteran. My dad actually graduated from the 109th session of the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. I had buddies that were in the Bureau, buddies that left the Bureau. And this is the state we're in America. Why go after a director? Why put that kind of fear in him? Because when you have to understand that knowledge is power, and we're in the greatest information war this country's ever seen before. You're asking all these questions. They deserve answers, okay? But if you got the answers, you would start thinking for yourself, and the country wouldn't be bowing down to this elite that's that's been marching down on our liberties. So if you put enough fear into a director not to make another movie, and if you put enough fear in his family, if he steps down, that keeps a weapon out of the information war.
Right.
Because what we've basically done by making these movies is there's a 3-letter fellow that was in our movie that said, look, how do you tell the difference between a $100 bill and a counterfeit $100 bill? Well, you put the two together and you look, and you can tell by looking at the real bill that this one's counterfeit. It's the same thing with the movies that I make and the 40,000 hours of footage that hasn't been released from the Capitol building. When you see what really happened that day versus the fake narrative that the J6 committee tried to push, and this administration is still pushing, it falls apart. And I have to tell you, after doing capital punishment, when we tested it with people on the left, they didn't cry when Ashley Babbitt died, but they cried when her dog died. That was their emotional trigger.
Wow.
And once that happened and the floodgates open, they see how they've been lied to about January 6th, everything falls apart because the folks on the left, they really believe what they're told. And when they see they've been lied to, it just challenges, the whole matrix falls apart. And they're like, if they're lying to us about January 6th, what else have they been lying to us about? So that's why films like this film I've just done, The War on Truth, are such a danger to the deep state, to the cabal, whatever you want to call it, powers that be, because the truth demolishes the lies.
And we'll come back and talk about that project that is available now when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues right after this.
The War on Truth.
If you are suggesting that the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources or FBI agents, the answer is no, it was not.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
It's not protest, it's insurrection.
When I said how many agents or assets of the government were present on January 5th and January 6th and agitating in the crowd to go into the Capitol and how many went into the Capitol, can you answer that now?
I don't know the answer to that question.
You don't know how many there were or there were none?
I don't know the answer to either of those questions.
I think you may have just perjured yourself that you don't know that there were any.
Smoke pops, and when F starts to leave, he's got 4 people in front of him and 4 people behind him, and they literally get him the hell out of there.
Based on your investigation so far, do you have any evidence that the Capitol attack was organized by, quote, fake Trump protesters?
We have not seen evidence of that.
We need to go into the Capitol.
I was in the front. I also orchestrated it.
The War on Truth. Go to thewarontruthmovie.com for more info.
Well, you're hearing our conversation here on Rick and Bubba University, the podcast with Chris, and that's probably as good a setup as you're going to have to remind you that Blaze Media, they're in the same project, trying to get the truth, trying to report on what's really happening. Because when they went to the streaming world, they said, "Look, we can't go to networks, we can't go to cable. You'll never be able to hear what we want to report. If you'd like to have reporting and truth, then you need to be part of Blaze Media. Their mission is to set fire to lies. Their mission is to bring you what's really happening, what Chris is just talking about. They got great documentaries themselves, Blaze Originals, and of course you got an hour of this show there, and others that are trying to do real journalism. But you're not going to get it if you go the traditional ways because of the things Chris is talking about. But go to blazetv.com. Subscribe today, and when you do, use the promo code Bubba to get $20 off your subscription. That's blazetv.com, the promo code Bubba. Now more than ever, do it today. Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Chris Burgard is our guest. We've kind of walked through his journey, and now that brings us to what you just set up, The War on the Truth. thewaronthetruthmovie.com. The title, does it tell us everything? You just set it up because you talked about we used to talk about this analogy. We talk about it with our faith, that the Secret Service dealing with counterfeit, the way they spot counterfeit is they learn the genuine article. They're never shown counterfeit. The problem we're having now is, what you just pointed out, is now we can't see the genuine article. So we don't know the difference. And you're saying that's the problem. That's why they're suppressing the genuine article or the truth.
Correct. And the cover-up is always worse than a lie.
Yeah.
And even if you, I pray everybody can see this movie. But even if you don't, there's things out there now that are just factual that just point to show you what the cover-up is. There was a fella, you may remember him, that used to say, if you make a lie big enough and repeat it often enough, it will become the truth of the state. His name was Joseph Goebbels. He worked for a guy named Adolf Hitler. That is exactly what's going on now. And let's just take one lie about January 6th. I saw Joe Biden say this just a few weeks ago on national TV, and this has been parroted and reported by the Justice Department, by the FBI, by corporate media over and over. 5 policemen, 5 law enforcement officials died on January 6th. They say that over and over to push the point that this was a bloody insurrection. And it's a complete fallacy. And they knew that within hours. But yet they keep pushing that over and over. Officer Brian Sicknick, who everybody we talked to was just a simply outstanding man. He unfortunately died the day after January 6th, not having his head bludgeoned in with a fire extinguisher like the media said, but he died of natural causes. The other 4 officers that died in the following weeks and months after January 6th from suicides. Who actually died that day were 4 Trump supporters. There was Benjamin Phillips, there was Kevin Grecian. They died of heart attacks, and one of them you're going to see in the movie. He's just standing there. He's an older fellow, and he gets hit with a flashbang in the chest that burns the face of the guy next to him. Then he goes down, and the next you see they're coming in, they're working on him, they're giving him CPR, but he doesn't make it. And then, of course, there's Ashley Babbitt, who was shot to death that day. And then there was a woman named Roseanne Boylan. And you're going to see in this movie, you'll hear her screaming for her life as she goes down. You're going to see people trying to save her life as she's being trampled. And they're begging the Capitol Police to help them. And they're not getting the help. She's unconscious, and she's struck by a police officer 3 times. And one of the eyewitnesses that's in the movie says he believes that it was the 3rd strike that killed her, because she went from being pink and rosy to just blue, and she stopped breathing and she got real cold. The stuff you're going to see in this film is just outrageous. There's a fellow named Colt Maccabee. He was in prison for 2 years before his trial. And if you ask Colt or his wife Sarah why he was in prison for so long before his trial, he'll say because he was an expert witness to the death of Roseanne Boylan. Colt was a sheriff's deputy from Tennessee. And he says they put him in prison to shut him up because they want him to testify against this. You see this over and over. And there's nobody that I know in law enforcement or in the military that says that Ashley Babbitt's shooting was a good shooting. And let me explain to you, as bad as this and this operation was run with military precision, and it did everything it needed to do. The main objective that day was to stop the investigation into the contested votes in these contested states. It worked perfectly. The operation, they stood up, Cruz and the guys stood up, and they voted for transparency, for pause. The House goes into a standing ovation. A flare goes up over the Capitol. The breach happens. They suspend activity. They break for almost 4 hours. And when they come back, nobody wants the investigation. So if you look at who benefited from January 6th, it wasn't the MAGA people. The MAGA people wanted Congress to go through with what they were doing. It was the other guys. And you'll see guys like Ray Epps in there. There were many Ray Epps fellas there that day. He's just one that people got, familiar with. But you'll see Ray Epps, that he's at the front line. They're pushing a sign into the police. And then all of a sudden, a flare goes off. We call it an avalanche flare. It means get out of there. And you see 8 people come in military precision. They put their arms on him, and they diddy mile this guy out of the crowd. And stuff like that was going on all day long. And here's as bad as it was, and as successful as it was to divide this country and to change the course of this election, it could have been worse. It's my belief it all came down to one guy, who was Capitol Police Lieutenant Tariq Johnson. Tariq did great stuff that day to save lives and help people, but the biggest thing he did was he's repeatedly on the radio asking Yogananda Pittman, his boss, Assistant Chief Yogananda Pittman, for permission to clear the Senate chambers and the House floor to evacuate the members. He asks over and over. He doesn't get it. Finally, he says, I'm going to take it on my own. I'm evacuating the chambers, and then we're going to evacuate the House floor. Now, why this is so important is because Capitol Police rules of engagement is if you're protecting the lives of congressional members, you have the right to use deadly force. If you're only protecting real estate, you do not. So by Tariq doing what he did, if he would have done it 10 minutes sooner and cleared out the House floor, Ashley Babbitt would still be alive because the rules of engagement would have changed.
Yeah.
If he would have done this 10 minutes later, and there still would have been members in the chamber as protesters came in there, you would have had a bloodbath. You would have had a lot of dead Americans, and you would have had blood flowing down the halls of the Capitol. And I believe that the people that orchestrated this event, that was their plan, that was their intent, that's what they wanted.
We'll come back and we'll finish our conversation. You can go to the warontruthmovie.com. We'll talk to Chris and we'll wrap up our time with him when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues. So have you got the Blaze TV merch yet? It's a great way to let people know what you're watching. Maybe you can talk to them about why it's important to be part of Blaze TV. And you'll love the merchandise that's available at shopblazemedia.com. Shopblazemedia.com. They have the Blaze Heritage and Blaze Media collections, jackets, T-shirts, hoodies, socks, mugs, candles, flags, and a lot more. You're going to love it. Now more than ever, this selection coming up is big, and it's a great time to make sure that this information is getting to the people. Go to shopblazemedia.com today. They got a lot of cool stuff available. Use the promo code BLAZE10 and get 10% off your entire order. That's shopblazemedia.com. The promo code is BLAZE10 for 10% off. Go ahead and do that today. Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, Chris Burgard, our guest. The movie, we've walked the other documentaries that he has done. The latest is the warontruthmovie.com, and he is giving us some insight about the movie. Now, I would assume trying to see it is not going to be easy. That's the reason why we're letting you know.
Yeah, it may not. Chris, let me ask you this. So much has been said about January the 6th, and we certainly have different portrayals of what was going on. To call it an insurrection, I never really got a hold of that because you had people with flagpoles. I mean, an insurrection is a military thing where you come in and you're trying to take over with weapons and holding people hostage. That didn't happen. Now, was it a mob that got out of control that was possibly trespassing? We saw some cases where people were coming through and posing for pictures. We saw some others that were not. What should have happened that day, or where did it go over the line?
Well, where it went over the line was when the violence started. But as you'll see in the movie, that was absolutely orchestrated. This is a military. This is an operation that was conducted on a military level exceptionally well. This is the first protest I've been to in 18 years where you didn't see a counter protest. And the reason is because the Antifa and the BLM folks, they were dressed as MAGA protesters. We have some, you'll see them filmed changing from black bloc clothes into MAGA clothes. I ran into these people. I filmed them. They were trying to get us to attack the Capitol Police. We wouldn't do it. We called them out as fake MAGA, and they ran away. Now, when I ran into FBI folks on the ground that day, agents, just soon after, I said, hey, you've got people wanting us to attack the Capitol Police. Do you want me to point out who they are? No, we're good. Well, I can show you where they are, and then before more violence breaks out, do you want to take a report? No, we're good. So at the time, and with my experience with the FBI, I just figured they all had it under control. But then when you found out what happened that day, they didn't have it under control. And then when you have FBI Director Christopher Wray a few weeks later sitting before Congress saying straight-faced into the cameras, into Congress, that they saw no evidence that day of BLM, Antifa, or anarchist activity contributing to violence. That is an out and outright lie. We saw them. We filmed them. They filmed themselves. John Sullivan, one of the leaders that helped coordinate the breaking into the breach in the Capitol, he filmed himself saying that. So where it went wrong was you had this plethora of humanity coming to the Capitol, and the energy was just amazing. I can't tell you, it was like a huge um, tailgate party, but then suddenly went terribly wrong. And what they did was it worked it like a herd. I don't know if you've ever worked cattle, but if you've got a big herd of cattle, you don't need to hit every one of the cattle in the herd. You just need to get the lead steers, and you get them doing what you want to do, and you push them. The rest of the herd will follow. Right. That's what happened on January 6th. And you're going to see in this movie, there's two women in this movie, Ashley Babbitt and Victoria White, that both stood up to the provocateurs, the people that were infiltrated into the crowd to cause violence. They tried to stop them. Ashley Babbitt, seconds before she died, you're going to see in here, there's a guy named Zach Allen who had a military helmet. He was trying to break the window to break in there to get at the congressman. She grabs him. He knocks her away. She grabs him again. She hits him with the left hook, knocks the glasses off his face. Just seconds before they yell, "Gun, gun," she goes to the window and gets shot. Victoria White, who's a single mom from Minnesota, is at this window, and these infiltrators, these provocateurs, professionals, are trying to break these windows with tools out of their backpacks. She pulls one of them down, pulls him down. People tell her not to leave him alone. They're all together. Another guy gets up, pulls out the exact same weapon that the first guy had, continues to break the window. She grabs him, pulls him down. Then the other provocateurs start to turn on her. She ends up being drugged into the tunnel at under the Capitol, where she's beaten into her head over 31 times that we can tell from the video by police with a metal baton. It cracks her face open. She's beaten and traumatized. So you have two strong women standing up to protect the Capitol. One dies, one's beaten severely. And people need to understand that Ashley Babbitt was a 14-year military veteran, and she lived her life to the last seconds of her life protecting this country, protecting the Capitol, upholding her oath to the Constitution. And what this administration has tried to do to make her sound like an insurrectionist, it's just insane. And as you'll see in the movie, there's some three-letter folks in the movie that talk about if this would have been a real insurrection, there's no way they could have stopped it. Tariq Johnson says if this would have been a real insurrection, there's no way they could have stopped it. Insurrection is a term that was used in a psychological operation to manipulate the minds of Americans into thinking that this was something that it was not. This was a co-opted operation. It was done brilliantly. And if we had more time, I could go into questions that should be asked if we had a real commission and who some of the players were to put this together. These are all questions that should be asked by people with way above the pay grade of just a cowboy filmmaker.
Well, we've always said if you're going to run an insurrection, you need different weapons than flagpoles and cameras. And that appeared to be the only weapons that were there by the people outside.
You're forgetting selfie sticks. They also had selfies.
Right. Got to have that. Well, I put that under camera. I include that.
So when you have that, the warontruthmovie.com, is that the only place people can go to get it? I'm sure they're not going to put you on in theaters. You're not going to get on major television and cable. That's the beauty of technology today, though. You can get this out. Is that where we need to push everybody, just to that website?
Yes, sir. That's the only place that we can get it. And I have to tell you, this is so censored. I used to be the main content creator at Breitbart for video. We fought the algorithms every day. The stuff we're seeing now is just insane. There's a good Marine who was in this movie. He was put in federal prison on misdemeanor trespassing charges for doing his job. And he had 110,000 people follow him on TikTok. And after the movie premiered, he just said, "Hey, go see this movie. I'm in it." They cut him off. He lost all 110,000 followers. Wow. That's part of the war on truth. That's how you censor people. That's how you shut off the voice. Can I just share one thing to you guys that was really...
Yeah, we got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
3 minutes. Remember under Obama, we had a director of DHS, Janet Napolitano?
Yes.
Okay, she put out these things called fusion papers, which 40,000 foot level. It's what you use strategies to coordinate with state and local law enforcement. And back under the Obama administration, she put out that the three most dangerous threats to national security in the United States of America were pro-secure border enthusiasts, Christian pro-lifers, and returning veterans.
That's right.
And that was hard to imagine at that time. I mean, because this is, Fort Hood is going on. We're worried about Al-Qaeda. We're worried about ISIS. And it was tough to process. Why would they do that? When we're making the War on Truth and we're talking to these guys that are in prison and been waiting 2 years for trial, we're talking to pro-secure border enthusiasts, we're talking to Christian pro-lifers, and we're talking to returning vets. And some of these vets, they're not just combat veterans, they're Rangers, they're Special Forces, they're guys that worked in intelligence. And as one of these guys, Master Sergeant Jeremy Brown, told me, I said, why are you in prison 2 years waiting for trial? He's like, Chris, you have to understand something. The United States military spent millions of dollars teaching me how to take down countries from the inside. If I wasn't in prison right now, I would be out on every podcast I could do, every TV show, talking to every journalist, explaining what happened on January 6th and what's going to happen next, because this is what I was trained to do in other countries. That's what we found out making this movie.
So he recognizes the strategy. They know he knows the strategy, so they're putting him on the bench,
exactly,
and holding him. And we now have a government, as they keep proving, as you point out, I'm sure in the movie as well, that if they target you, they'll use every single agency that is available to them to keep you from getting in the way of what they're trying to do, which is what our founding fathers warned us about. Any weapon you give the government, they will always abuse it. And boy, do we need to hear that loud and clear now on this suppression of the truth and deciding what we can and can't see and hear. It harkens back to all the evil regimes of world history. Chris, thank you for taking time to be with us today. And
Chris, we could have talked for another 2 hours.
Yeah,
man.
Thanks for your courage. Thanks for loving the country and using your gifts to try to get the truth in the ears and in front of the eyes of the people who need to hear it. Go to thewarontruthmovie.com, thewarontruthmovie.com. Thank you, Chris, and thanks to each and every one of you for joining us on this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast.